your patience and understanding as we work on this new funding program. I appreciate all the feedback that has been given to us during these several months. We've taken all of that feedback very seriously, and we've been working hard to get this up and running because everybody recognizes the importance of changing the funding system to meet the neighborhood council needs. So without further ado, and because we are starting a little bit late, let's kind of go right into it. And like Stephen mentioned, if you have any questions, I will let you know the particular timeframes in which we can do a brief Q&A so that we can get everybody out of here on time, and in particular the board members who may not be involved directly in the funding process. So here's a roadmap for what we're going to look at today. The general overview is for all board members. We're going to talk about the purpose, the introduction, the funding flow, the responsibilities of the board as well as the treasurer and signer, the annual budget, funding requests and how they'll be handled in the new checking account system, board approval, conflict of interest issues, allowable expenditures and prohibited expenditures. So after we get through that time frame, we'll have a brief Q&A, and any board members who are here that are not going to be part of the funding directly as a treasurer or as a signer will be able to leave at that point, and they can complete their registration either online or by completing a form. For the treasurers and signers, there will be a second part on setting up the new NC checking account, the cash request form, which is one of our new forms for processing things in the new funding program, the funding request form, a board vote, which is going to take the place of board resolutions and such. We're going to talk a little bit about the online bill pay feature, the debit card / charge card, the monthly expenditure report, neighborhood purpose grants, neighborhood improvement projects, and finally inventory. So let's dive right into that. So everybody's familiar with this. The purpose of the citywide system of neighborhood councils is to promote more citizen participation in government and make government more responsive to local needs. It's good to keep that in mind as we talk about the allowable expenditures and things that are prohibited, to keep in mind what the goals of the neighborhood council are and how to keep this purpose in mind. As a general introduction for some who may not know, there are 95 neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles. The Department of Neighborhood Empowerment is actually a very small department. We have a staff of about 20 right now with a couple of part-time staff members helping us with different tasks. The current funding program has been identified as not sustainable given the staffing levels that we have. It relies intensively on the neighborhood council submitting paperwork to the department reviewing it, and then working with the city's payment systems to process the checks. It requires several steps of review and approval inside of the system. And that's been the biggest problem in processing payments for neighborhood councils. The checking account system would give the NCs charge of issuing those payments to vendors. So that's what we're hoping to cut out, the process of waiting for a check to be cut from the city. This new checking account system would expedite those payments to vendors. And for the future, it also sets up the possibility of neighborhood councils being able to set up, to request grants and donations. So as we work toward those long-term goals, this checking account is a good first step in that direction. In addition to that, the funding staff would be refocused on auditing and compliance as opposed to processing checks. So we would be able to make sure that things are done appropriately and focus on those issues. Currently, the neighborhood councils are allotted $37,000 for this fiscal year. And as I've heard some people mention already, these are public funds, so we need to be careful how they're used. And because we're offering more flexibility under this checking account system, we are requiring board training for all board members to safeguard these funds. If everybody is informed and educated about the funding process and has a general idea of what is allowable and what isn't, there will be more oversight on the neighborhood council side as well as on the department side. And as Stephen mentioned, the deadline for all board members to complete the funding general overview training and the ethics next training is September 1st. So let's talk a little bit about the funding flow under the new checking account system. So it starts with the department. The department has access to the appropriation amount for each neighborhood council, which is $37,000. Starting in July, we would put $4,000 seed money into each neighborhood council's account, assuming that they completed the training and met all the requirements for signing up for this checking account system. So the $4,000 are now in the account, and the neighborhood council will receive funding requests for their operations, for outreach issues, events, neighborhood purpose grants, etc. The board reviews and approves those expenses. And authorization is contained within the neighborhood council, so if the treasurer or the signer would be the one identified as providing authorization to issue the payment. The card holder or the other, we have a treasurer and signer, and I'll get into the roles a little bit more later, but the other party would be responsible for issuing the payment online through the Wells Fargo account. They pay the vendor. Vendor receives the check and provides the services and the receipts, etc. Cardholder gets all that documentation back and submits it to the board in the form of a report. And then the board reviews the monthly expenditures and approves the expenses for that month. And then that's submitted back to the department for the next month's additional cash requests and to continue each month's funding. So there is a new element to this checking account system in terms of the responsibilities of the treasurer and second signatory. In the current funding program, it is a little bit more up in the air who can have the purchase card, whether the treasurer wants to be the purchase card holder and take care of all the forms and issuing the payments and writing the reports, and the second signatory is just somebody who reviews the document, signs off on all the demand warrants, etc. And in some neighborhood councils, they do balance it out a little more. One person holds the card and the other writes the reports. So, in setting up this new account, we do want to emphasize that dual responsibility as a way of having checks and balances and making sure that the funds are spent appropriately. So the two key roles in this new funding process are preparing reports and forms and issuing those payments to vendors. Those are the two, preparing reports and forms, forms and the forms for all the funding processes, reports for the board, and then the other role would be issuing those payments to the vendors. It's up to the NC board members to determine their role. So right now we're leaving it up. The treasurer wants to be the one doing the reports and the forms, or if they want to be the card holder and issuing those payments, then we'll leave that to the discretion of the board. So in terms of the reporting responsibilities, the forms and reports preparer, excuse the term, but we haven't come up with a really good term for this role. We can call it the preparer for this, but if a better term comes along, we'll let you know. Monthly cash, they prepare the monthly cash request form, and we'll talk about this one in a little bit. The funding request form, a monthly expenditure report, supplemental cash request form if necessary, and they present all these forms and reports to the board, and then they are the point of authority to let the card holder know when it's okay to issue a payment to a vendor. And the card holder is responsible for issuing those online check payments to vendors. They assume sole custody of the charge card. They expend the funds from the charge card. They collect and safeguard all the original invoices, receipts, and payment documentation. And most importantly, they submit these invoices timely to the preparer or the reports person for the monthly reconciliation process. So it's very important to have two members who are going to be able to work together and share the information and pass the documentation over when needed in order to make sure that the funding stays rolling. In terms of board responsibility, just as a reminder, each neighborhood council board member including everybody who votes on these funding matters, is responsible for ensuring that these checking account activity complies with the policies and the procedures of the department. As a requirement, each board member, like I mentioned before, has to attend one of these overview trainings and understand the basic process of funding. If there is a board member who has not taken the training by September 1st, including the ethics training, they would be ineligible to vote on any funding matters. And this wouldn't affect a quorum for meetings for any other issues. Each board member must also understand conflicts of interest laws covered in the ethics training, which is why we require that as part of the access to vote on funding matters. And you know, as always, if in doubt, if you're unsure whether you have a conflict of interest, contact the department, contact the city attorney's office to make sure that the board is able to vote appropriately on all funding matters. Let's talk a little bit about the annual budget. The budget should be used as a strategic financial guide to conduct activities that will help the NC achieve its goals. So we have a template online. The budget categories are operating expenses, outreach, neighborhood improvement projects, neighborhood purpose grants, and a new category which used to be couched under the outreach activities is the election-related expenses. The budget should be provided in the standard format that's available on our website. Neighborhood councils, if they want to participate in the funding program, are required to submit a board-approved budget every fiscal year. It should be submitted by the treasurer or the signer, signed by both, together with a board resolution or agenda and minutes showing the board action and the current board roster. And this year is the first year that we also have a strategic plan link on our website for you to better flesh out the goals of your budget.
Can you assume that to fill the whole screen, even though it's a small screen? You get it all? We have a pretty small print. It's not always exactly the same.
We do. Just go online, go on the funding sheet, take a look at it over there. It's tiny over there too.
I think that's the best we're going to be able to do. All these forms and documents, by the way, will be available on our website by the end of this week. So if you do want to review something more closely, it will be available. Okay, funding requests under the new program. So all funding requests should be approved by the entire board and identifiable under one of the approved budget categories. All requests, and this is new to this process, all the requests for funding will be on a standardized form, and we'll get to that form in a little bit. The recurring monthly operational expenses can be approved only once, indicating the amount and the time frame. So if you have, a utility bill or a phone service, something like that, you do the funding request form once, and you state the time frame and the amount, and then once it's approved by the board, then you don't have to keep going every single month to approve every single operational expense like that. It's a recurring one.
Armando, I'm in trouble because I have expenditure requests and the text does not match what's on the board.
Can we save the questions for the section, and then I'll be happy to address.
Funding request, we don't have that.
It's the expenditure request page. It's the same stuff.
It's missing.
No, it's the same page as expenditure requests.
Right.
Yeah.
Page 12.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, it says, yours
Yeah, it's the same page though, so
funding.
my apologies if the title is different. Okay, so that's for recurring monthly expenses. For outreach, neighborhood improvement projects, neighborhood purpose grants, and election expenses, these should be approved, obviously, per request. And in addition to that, because the department needs to review certain expenses prior to any issuing of payment, the following should be submitted to the department for review after the board has voted to approve the expenditure. This includes all neighborhood purpose grants, all neighborhood improvement projects, contracts, leases, NC sponsored or co-sponsored events, and any expenditures over $2,500. So because we are giving you the ability to issue checks directly for neighborhood purpose grants and a lot of these other expenses, these particular categories do need to be pre-approved and authorized by the department. The current turnaround time that we're estimating for review of this is 5 business days. Only special accounts set up by council action will continue to be paid via demand warrant. So this has to do with any council votes to transfer funds into a special account for a neighborhood council. And if there's a specific purpose for those, we're going to keep those funds separate from the NC checking account. And we'll use the demand warrant process to pay out of those accounts. There's also going to be a board approval form. The department will have this form available so that the board can track the votes, the yeses, the noes, the abstentions. It will be listed, and on the bottom will include the language, the resolution language that was previously submitted with demand warrants when needed to identify the authorizations for a particular expense. Okay, in regards to conflicts of interest, the Political Reform Act states that no public official shall make, participate in, making, or in any way use his or her official position to influence a governmental decision in which the official has a material financial interest. If an official has a conflict of interest, the official will be disqualified from acting on the matter. You must recuse yourself entirely from the funding decision, including any discussion leading up to a vote. So that's very important. If you feel you have a conflict of interest and you either chose not to contact the department but you're concerned about it, your best bet is to get up and leave the room, recuse yourself, don't participate in the discussion, don't pass the motion. If you are involved in any part elements of that, you might, if there is a conflict of interest, then you might have tainted the process for that funding item. And that could, preclude the neighborhood council from voting on that for up to 3 years, depending on the issue. So when in doubt, please contact the department or the city attorney's office. Okay, let's talk about the allowable expenditures. So all purchases of equipment, supplies, and services should be for the sole purpose of building the social capital of the neighborhood council to benefit the community. So the previous version of this presentation just had social capital and got a lot of questions. What is social capital? So I added this little definition to kind of help identify how social capital might be defined with the neighborhood councils. So in this case, it's the extent of the NC's social relations with their community insofar as they have a productive benefit, which forwards their mission to promote more citizen participation in government and make government more responsive to local needs. So we're going back to that first slide and tying it all back together again. All of these expenditures should be aimed at building the social capital. So some examples of the allowable expenditures include the following. So I'm not going to go into one by one on these items, but there's different kinds of services: business services, communication services, professional services, and just a special note, please make sure that any of these services, we're considering them allowable so long as they're provided to the neighborhood council in the furtherance of their goals. So, just for example, some of these that come up every now and then as a question is, charitable and social service organizations. It's an allowable expenditure under professional services, meaning that these organizations are providing actual service. If the neighborhood council is going to give them money, the only option available is through the neighborhood purpose grant program. So you can't just give a donation directly to a charitable organization or a nonprofit. It would have to be through the 501c3 neighborhood purpose grants program. Also repair services and retail services. A little note on retail services in regards to food and refreshments. The neighborhood council needs to be careful on, how much they're spending on food and refreshments for their board meetings. The general rule is light refreshments, finger foods, water, cookies, light refreshments, as opposed to, 3-course, 5-course meals, etc. These are public funds, so that being said, we do recognize that there are certain events where it may be an integral part of the events to have some sort of food or something like that, so please contact the department to review those requests, and we'll see how we can work with you to help you meet your goals. Okay, prohibited expenditures. First and foremost, any purchases made without the prior approval of the neighborhood council governing body. Any purchases not identified in the approved budget. Payments for services over an extended period of time that may require a personal services agreement executed by the department. There are some exceptions for some of the smaller things like a P.O. box, etc. But just contact the department to see if some of these extended period of time services will require a contract. We'll work with you on that. Prepayment or advance payment of goods or services. Check with the department first prior to issuing prepayments or advance payments. Payment for transportation services or travel expenses. Split charges. So using multiple transactions for a single charge to circumvent the maximum threshold amount allowed of $2,500. Donations of money or goods to individuals or groups. Again, Neighborhood Purpose Grants Program is the vehicle for which neighborhood councils can grant monies to 501c3 nonprofits and public schools. Items or services from an entity that did not participate in a fair and open selection process. Currently, the threshold amount is anything that's over $5,000, requires 3 bids from local vendors, and may need a contract depending on the terms of services. So if you need assistance in getting 3 bids or something like that, contact the funding unit and we can help you get that taken care of. And also help you make the determination of whether a service contract is required. Any purchases or capital improvement projects that increase the value of private property or do not benefit the general public. Events or projects that do not have the required insurance and permits. Liability is always an important consideration with any project. So if you're a sponsor or co-sponsor or you're hosting an event, contact the department and we'll contact the city's risk management office to help identify if any permits will be required or if there's any additional insurance requirements that we need to meet prior to the event. Third-party reimbursements, those are not allowed. We can only do board member reimbursements. So if one of your board members, spends money for an authorized expense, incidental or whatever, then we can reimburse them under the current system and under the new checking account system as well. But we can't reimburse the spouse of a board member, the friend of a board member, or somebody who decided to put the deposit down on behalf of the neighborhood council. So please be very careful about that and make sure that everybody understands that. Here's an obvious one: purchases of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or adult entertainment products.
Oh, come on.
Go figure.
Jeez. Biggie.
We're stuck out.
Come on, Armando.
Purchases that violate the constitutional separation of church and state. Obviously, you can't endorse or interfere with free religious exercise using public funds. Purchases that violate city and or state conflict of interest laws, as I mentioned previously. Any expenditures that support or oppose particular ballot measures, candidates, or political forums that are not completely, open and unbiased. So, I know that a lot of neighborhood councils do have like candidate forums and things like that, and those are, very good and very valuable to the community. Just make sure that all candidates are invited and any flyers or documents pertaining to that event present an unbiased picture of the event, not endorsing any particular candidate over another. You can't use the city's money to sue the city, or any city agency. Stuck up, sorry. And when in doubt, please ask. Okay, enforcement of improper spending activity. So, under the new checking account system, the department, since they'll be focused more on monitoring and auditing and ensuring compliance, we may stop payment on a check and charge the fees to the NC's appropriation account if we identify an improper use of those funds. If the funds already have been issued to the vendor, we may require the neighborhood council to get a refund of the money and return any of the goods purchased. If for any reason we are not able to get those funds retrieved, we would reduce the NC's appropriation by the amount identified as improper. So if you buy a $100 gift card and give it out and somebody's long gone with it, we would reduce the NC's account by an additional $100 as a punitive measure. And then other enforcement actions as deemed appropriate based on the severity of the incident, including city attorney involvement, criminal enforcement, obviously depending on how severe the issue is. Okay, so we've reached the end of the general overview. So if you are a board member who is not a treasurer